How do I check if a list is empty? In Python, every object can be treated as either being true or false. If we throw anything that we like into an if statement, this is always valid. Some languages are going to force it to be either literally a true or a false, or some Boolean expression. Python can take any object and determine whether it's true or false for the purposes of a condition. Most objects are true by default. The exceptions are none, which is always going to be false, 0, which is always going to be false, an empty string, which is false, and any empty collection. So an empty list, an empty tuple, an empty dictionary, an empty set is also going to be false. This means that you can check for things like a zero-length string. You can check for a zero value simply by saying if x. You can't necessarily distinguish between these, but most of the time you don't need to. If you're expecting a list with values in it and you get none, it doesn't matter. You don't care anymore. If you get an empty tuple instead of an empty list, it's still empty. You don't want to do any processing on it, so you want to fall into the second category, go through the else path, or simply not do the processing you were going to do. If you explicitly want to check for one of these values, you can do that using the is statement instead. Far if x is none. This will help me tell the difference between an empty list and if x is explicitly none. This is the right way to test for none, if that is what you're interested in versus any of the others. One little gotcha with this is that the test never looks at the contents of the list. So if I wipe this out, if I have an expression that ends up being like this, that's going to be false because that list is empty. If I have an expression that looks like this, that's going to be false because 0 is false. But if I have an expression that looks like this, that's going to be true because the value that we're looking at is a list with one element, and a list with one element is true and not false. It doesn't matter what the element is. It could be 0, it could be none, it could be another empty list, but the list we're looking at the outermost level is not empty, and so this returns true. A way that you can easily test this to look at any value and see what Python thinks it is to use the bool function, which will take any value and is going to give you back either true or false. This is helpful for inspecting a value if you're not sure what it's going to return. Some custom classes can override this behavior, and they can return false when you may be expecting them to return true. By default, everything returns true, some special values return false, and you can test it either with an if statement or the bool function.